Hello everyone. Have you ever managed to sacrifice all your pieces in a single game? Now imagine that after doing so, you could still win. In this video, I'll show you the remarkable game between Sergey Serper and Ioannis Nikolaidis. By the end, you'll see that every white piece I'm pointing out on the board was offered up as a sacrifice to black. The king wasn't given, of course, but still, it's a staggering display. White begins with pawn to c4. Black replies with pawn to g6, then pawn to e4, bishop to g7, pawn to d4, white fully takes control of the center with pawns, and black responds with pawn to d6. Knight to c3, knight to f6, knight g to e2. Black develops another knight, delaying castling a bit. White brings the knight to g3, and after pawn to c6, white finishes kingside development, preparing to castle. Black plays pawn to a6, still not castling. White notes that the black king hasn't yet committed, he might even castle queenside later, and white also keeps his plans hidden. Bishop to e3 develops another piece, and after pawn to h5, black reveals ambitious intentions. As we can see, black is pushing both on the kingside and the queenside, trying to play across the entire board. But this strategy doesn't always lead to success. White strengthens the center with pawn to f3, defending the pawn on e4. Black hits back on the queenside with pawn to b5. White refuses to trade on b5 and instead advances pawn to c5, locking the black pawn on c6. Black captures on c5, and after white recaptures, the black queen emerges to c7. White castles, and black thrusts forward with pawn to h4. The pawn storms toward white's king, but it's not fatal. White's knight has only one retreat square, h1, and it drops back. Black continues with knight to h5, eyeing a jump to f4. White plays queen to d2 to prevent it, and after pawn to e5, the white knight re-enters the game on f2. At this point, black thinks hard but declines to castle short, which may have been a good defensive choice. Instead, black plays knight to f8, perhaps aiming to reroute the knight to e6 or d7, keeping queenside castling in mind. But white, ahead in development, strikes first. Pawn to a4, pressuring the queenside. Black responds with pawn to b4, refusing exchanges and trying to close the position. Then comes knight to d5, the first sacrifice of the game. White offers the knight to black's c6 pawn. Black has little choice but to take it, because if he doesn't, the knight jumps to b6 with devastating positional pressure, leaving the black king stranded in the center. So black captures on d5, and white replies with pawn takes e4. Now the point becomes clear, white has traded a knight for two magnificent central pawns, already past the midline, bearing down on the black king stuck in the center. Notice also how the knight on f8 clogs up black's own defenses, restricting the king's mobility. Black tries pawn to f5, an understandable attempt to seize counterplay. It even threatens pawn to f4, trapping white's dark squared bishop. But white isn't concerned with material. He is hunting the black king. Pawn to d6 comes, driving back the queen. After queen to c6, white continues to shower black with sacrifices, bishop to b5. Once again, black must accept. If not, he loses material immediately due to the pin on the queen and king. So he captures the bishop, but now the tactical floodgates open. White's position brims with threats. The rook on a8 is hanging if black isn't careful, and every capture opens new lines. So after black captures the bishop, another tactical theme arises. Black can't even safely recapture the pawn because then the rook on a8 would be left hanging. However, in the actual game, black was clearly overwhelmed by this powerful white pawn phalanx in the center and decided to sacrifice the rook, capturing on b5 with the queen. After rook takes on a8, the queen retreated to c6. It should be noted that the best move here was indeed queen to b7, defending the rook. Nothing immediately dangerous was visible for black. For example, after c6 and an exchange of rooks, even if white took, black would have time to capture on f1, and after bishop takes d7, yes, the position would still be lost for black, but some accuracy was required. Instead, in the game, black gave up the rook on a8. After rook takes on b5, rook takes a8, then queen to c6 attacking the rook. White must move the rook, but not so fast. The second rook now joins the attack, bringing yet another piece into the assault on the black king. But black lashes out with f4, deciding they have nothing better than to start devouring whatever they can. With f4, they trap the bishop. White responds with rook to a7. Black thinks for a while and avoids immediately recapturing the bishop, playing knight to d7 instead, since the threat of a rook invading the 7th rank with doubling was already looming. White sticks to their plan of feeding black material and offers yet another piece, the rook on c8. After check on c8, black is forced to capture, and then comes queen to d5. White once again leaves another piece and prize. But their real target is the black king. Black greedily captures white's bishop on e3, but then comes queen to e6 check. The king retreats to f8, since if it had gone to d8, white would have delivered mate in 1 with queen to e7. So king to f8, and now imagine what would happen if white saved their knight, which is hanging under attack from a black pawn. Naturally, they don't. Instead, they capture the knight on d7. After black checks with queen takes f2, the white king calmly steps to f1 without even taking the pawn. This king move to f1 is extremely precise, because if white had captured on f2 with the king, it would have seemed that one attacking unit was eliminated, but then black could counterattack, and white would likely lose. For example, after king to e2, there's a knight fork on the king and queen. And if the king retreats to e1 or f1, the black queen activates, gobbles pawns, and soon it's white who gets checkmated. That's why king to f1 is correct, a quiet retreat. Now checks like queen to a6 are harmless, because white simply takes the pawn, and there are no more checks left. Meanwhile, white threatens mate in 1 against the black king. Black makes the only move to prevent mate on f7, they offer a queen exchange. But what kind of exchange is that? White still has at least 2 more pieces to sacrifice. So comes the rook sacrifice on f7. White continues to feed black. They are forced to capture. Queen to c8 check follows. Queen to e8, again offering an exchange. This time white accepts, but on their terms, knight to d7, defending the queen on c8 and attacking black's queen. Of course, capturing on c8 is impossible. White would simply promote another queen. Black is forced to retreat the king to f7, hoping to bring the rook into play. After the exchange, we reach a position where black has 3 pieces for white's queen. It looks like full compensation, but not at all. White's strong passed pawn on c5 is the key. After queen check on b7, rook to e7 blocks. And now white fulfills their dream. They sacrifice the last remaining piece, besides the king, with c6, offering even their queen. Black did not accept this queen sacrifice. After all, if they captured, then after the recapture, white would inevitably promote another queen on b8, and there was no way to defend against this threat. Instead, black played e4, trying to push their trump card, the pawn still sitting on f2. After e2 check, for example, if white had captured on f2, mate would follow with queen to e1. White noticed this threat, but it didn't scare them at all. They pushed c7. The pawn was just 1 step away from queening. Black drove their pawn forward as well, and suddenly the white king stood 1 move away from checkmate. But white held the initiative with the only move, queen to d5 check. The black king stepped back to f6, and after queen to d6 check, king to f7, then queen to d5 again, and king to f6. White repeated checks here, partly to gain time and partly because the players had just passed the time control. After another queen to d6 check and king to f7, white sacrificed yet another queen on e7, destroying the black rook that was supporting the dangerous e3 pawn in its advance. White's queen then rose from the ashes on c8, promoted from the c7 pawn, while black had nothing left but to cling to their passed pawns. So what do we have? White had indeed sacrificed their entire original set of pieces. The only queen on the board was a newly promoted one. But the game wasn't over yet. White checked on c5, the king retreated, then check on b5, and after check on b6, white captured the pawn on g6 with a double attack on both black's bishop and knight. There was no way to save both pieces. Black, deciding that even a broken weapon might fire once a year, pushed e2 check. White had to be extremely careful. 2 captures were possible, either with the pawn on f2 or the pawn on e2. Try to find the winning continuation here. 1, 2, 3. White captured with the pawn on f2, because if they had taken on e2 instead, black had a cunning knight fork on the king and queen. By capturing on f2, white kept the win. They didn't miss the trick. Still, Black kept throwing everything forward. Bishop to e3 check followed. Now it was black sacrificing pieces. But white wanted nothing to do with them, they calmly stepped to e1. And in this position, black resigned. Of course, taking the bishop was impossible, then black would have promoted another queen on e1. For example, if the king had captured on e2, there would again be that same knight fork on the king and queen. So after king to e1, why did black give up? Well, because they had no compensation for white's queen. Two minor pieces were not enough, especially since the e2 pawn would soon fall. Moreover, white could, with checks, eventually grab the pawn on b4 and push their passed pawn to promotion. And that was it, an absolutely brilliant, evergreen game. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.